So Councillor Collins and Member Taipari's for lateness. So a mover.
Apologies for leaving at 12:15.
And likewise for
Yeah.
there's quite a few of us going to the Women's Suffrage Day anniversary, so if we can be disciplined and get through and help the chair, we'll all be able to get there on time.
Yep, it's on the agenda. If we're still going to, we're going to stop at 12:15.
Can I move the whole agenda then?
I'll second that.
So look, I'll second the apologies, Chair.
Okay.
I know that Councillor Simpson moved them.
She jumped in, righto. We've got to move in a second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Okay, any declaration of interest from anyone? No declaration of interest. Confirmation of the previous minutes. Moved by Deputy Mayor. Well done. Seconded by myself. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. There are no petitions, no public input, no local board input, no extraordinary items, no notices of motion today. So we have a review of the funding, the annual plan. So we have coming up, we've got a number of people. Alistair, yep. Dave, are we going to have everyone up or not? David and team, James, Jonathan, Shona.
Quite well.
We've got enough seats. I think you can come up.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so Tanya and Alistair, right. Welcome all.
Morena tātou. The report before you this morning contains a review of the decision to support an annual Auckland Arts Festival on a trial basis. While I'll predominantly take the report as read, I just briefly wanted to draw your attention to a few aspects of the decision that you're being asked to make today. In 2014, the former Budget Committee resolved to support the Auckland Festival Trust transition from a 2-yearly festival to an annual festival. This was on a trial basis only. Now that the festival was held in 2016 and again in 2017, this committee is asked to decide in principle whether it supports continuation of a festival on the annual basis. The committee is not being asked to decide the level of funding that the Trust will receive as a regional amenity. That decision is for the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board. The Funding Board will separately scrutinise the application before it, which I believe goes to them formally on the 25th of September, and they will decide the level of funding for the Trust. Just by way of illustration, when Council decided to support an annual event, the Funding Board increased funding to the Trust by approximately $1 million per year. It received that additional funding over 2015-16 and again in 2016-17. The report before you sets out the advantages and disadvantages, a review of those in moving to an annual event. It recommends that the committee continues to support the annual festival, and it also recommends that staff write to the Funding Board requesting that it keeps a watching brief over the festival and its impact on other arts organisations. Essentially, the Trust has done what was asked of it when Council first decided to move to the annual event. Most importantly, I think that the sector generally shows support for the festival, more so than it did at the time that the original decision was made to support the annual event. I'll take the remainder of the report as read and address any questions that the committee may have. Just to let you know that the Auckland Festival Trust is also alongside us should you wish to directly ask questions from them.
So just to be quite clear on the funding, it was 4.6 for two festivals, and it's now 6.6 for 3 years, is it right? It's working out at 2.2 per year on an annual basis, as compared to 2.3 before when it was every second year?
So Yeah.
So we originally
Thoughts?
received about 4.3 for each festival on a 2-yearly basis.
Yeah.
We now have received roughly 6.3, 6.6 over the same period, but we deliver 2 festivals.
Yep, okay.
So the price didn't double.
Right, sorry, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Could someone from the Trust potentially answer my question around sponsorship? That's the only area that appeals to be a bit weak. Is it your thoughts around the reason for inability to be able to find that contra and cash sponsorship for as much as you've had? It's been dropping. So
Sorry, David, do you just want to introduce your team?
Yes, sure, yeah. Jonathan Bielski beside me on my right is our Artistic Director. Nick Kalayan is our Chair of Finance, and Shona Roberts behind me is our Business and Finance Director.
I mean, just interested in that particular downward
Yep.
turn.
Contras remained very close to the same level.
Right.
We have great support from NZME and Cleanso and Auckland Airport, etc., which has allowed our marketing to stay at the forefront and not incur additional cash spend. It's fair to say we didn't double the cash income, but we certainly are generating more over the same 2-year period than we did previously. Cash sponsorship is a challenge, there's no question about it for all arts organisations. Where we've been working mostly is in developing
David,
individual
can you
giving.
just pull that
Yep,
speaker
sure.
in front of you there?
Where we've been working mainly is in developing individual giving and working at smaller corporate cash sponsorships as opposed to the big ones we all used to get in the past. So it's looking promising for this year. We will get more cash income than we did the festival to Scone, and it's core that contra remains very strong, especially for our marketing.
Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thanks, David. I've got 2 questions, the usual ones. I'm interested in your reach into the free and low-cost programming, and you've collapsed both together, so I can't actually separate out which costs nothing from what costs a little. So my first question is, can you separate them out and talk about them separately, or is there no need to do that? And my second question relates to both geographical reach, because I know you went to Glen Innes and Mangere. I'm not sure where else outside of the CBD.
East,
you went
east,
to,
west,
hang on,
north
no,
and
hang on.
south.
I'll finish my
All over the
question.
show.
I'm also interested, though, in your reach into our demographic profile populations such as Pacifica, Maori, and other ethnic groups. And from what I read in the report, it's much the same in 2013 as it was in 2011. So what's your projection out for the
I'll hand
trial
to
period?
Jonathan for that one.
Yes, thank you. So I've just joined the organisation as the Artistic Director, so I sort of come in with some fresh eyes, but also some opinions. So I guess I'll unpack those questions in a number of different ways. The best way to think about the proportion of people who are attending paid ticketed events and free is that of the 196,000 people who attended this year, 60,000 of them purchased tickets. So the overwhelming majority of people who are participating in the festival are attending free events. And there are a whole lot of different events in the festival that are taking place in different parts of Auckland. I don't want to list them all, but the major proportion of the festival's participation is free. And it's certainly our intention to keep growing that because the demand is so high. People are interested in participating in the festival. We're lucky to have plenty of people who want to buy a ticket, but also a lot of people want to come along and participate free. In the next festival, we're going to be introducing a number of new initiatives that specifically address the issue of low cost and free. So one of the things that we would like to be able to do is to give an opportunity for people who would like to go to the ticketed events, the ones that cost money, but at a very low ticket price, and in some cases free. And so we're going to introduce some targeted programs for that specifically. That will give us an opportunity to welcome in people who are interested in going to big ticket items like your Giselles and your 1984s, but who couldn't dream of paying the ticket price. Because as a publicly subsidised festival, we feel quite strongly that a major pillar of our identity has to be providing free and low-cost access to the events.
And your reach into the communities such as Pacifica and Maori?
Yes.
Well, we have had a significant increase in the numbers of people coming from the non-European audiences, if you like. Asian audiences, these are figures we have, represent 9% of total audiences. Maori 6% and Pacifica 3%. which is a 33% increase in those groups to that which we had 2 festivals ago. So we are working hard in this area, and I believe that we will continue to see more participation by those groups than we have had in the past.
And the other bit was the geographical spread of the festival and making sure that you give people access in their own communities to great events.
Well, I think last time we had work in Warkworth, we had work on the North Shore, we had work in Glen Innes, we had work in Mangere, and we had work obviously down in Manukau. So a reasonable spread, I believe.
No, the question was what are you doing to increase that spread?
We introduced a program last year called Whānui, which was supported partly by the Arts Council, CNZ and Foundation North, and mostly by ourselves with the support of your funding, of course, that developed work within communities for communities. There were 5 projects last year, pilot projects, and we're growing that program this year and certainly intend to grow that over the next 3 years. So that's working with communities in communities like Manukau last year with the Rising Oceans work, like the housing project, Kauwhai Cloak we did in Glen Innes. So they're real community-based programs, and I think that's how we'll grow our footprint. We can't expect everybody to always come to the city, even though we're putting in pricing strategies to help that, and some transport strategies, but the core to us is growing that whānui, that outreach program, to be real, meaningful, and increase the numbers.
Thanks, David. Good to hear.
Kaka.
Thank you. My question's largely been asked actually in terms of the diversification and increase in Māori-specific population attending. So we've seen a 100% increase from 3% to 6%. It's still not enough, but just encourage you to keep on the same pathway as what Councillor Casey's been talking about. See that geographical stretch go beyond Manukau if possible in terms of the Manirua and the Papakura Franklin communities, where possible. So it's really just a plug to increase or diversify its program audience and geographical reach, and in particular both Māori artists, events and audience attendance, which was put on the table I think previously. So just to say we're watching this and we'd love to see the spread and the diversification. But Councillor Casey pretty much asked my question, mate. So, thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's right that some of the questions that are being raised in regards to the spread of free tickets, geographic, demographic considerations. I was just curious, for the trust, you can see in paragraph 30 what we're going to be writing to you about in terms of our expectations from council if we do indeed pass option 1. And that last point is about collaborating across the council group to leverage other council-funded activities. So I'm just curious as to, is that a discussion that you would already, when you read those words, would you know what council means when it says leveraging your work across other council-funded activities? Or is that something that this discussion needs to ensue?
Yes, no, it is. I mean, we're in conversation with different parts of council that are involved with event activity. For example, the festival works with the council-funded galleries or board-funded galleries as part of the visual arts program. We work with Panuku and regional facilities Auckland extensively. So there's quite a lot of connections between the festival and various parts of council. Now, there's always more to do, and we're increasing that conversation, but it's already quite embedded in the way the festival works now.
Okay, thanks.
Can you just confirm that, it's great you had the highest attendance and the second highest box office, but it was really bad weather this year. So how much do you think that would have affected your take? I mean, do you think it potentially could have been 10% higher, 20% higher?
Yeah, somewhere between 5 and 10, I think. It was mainly around the power plant on that opening weekend, and of course that weather stopped them coming out as well.
Yeah.
But we're only just short of our biggest box office of 3.1 in 2013 when we had the huge Group F show at the Domain, so they were very close.
Every weekend was stormy.
Yeah.
And just one more other question is, there was concern from other arts providers that moving to an annual festival might start to crowd them out a bit, but I believe there's greater acceptance. Can you confirm the acceptance and how you are working with them successfully?
So we work closely with the APO, of course. That's used to do 3 concerts every 2 years. Now we do 6 effectively. This year, 1984 will play at Auckland Theatre Company's venue in association with them for 2.5 weeks. We're partnering with the Opera for Candide, which was released last week. Then we work with Q Theatre. We work with Silo, the Poe Theatre out in. And so I think it's, if anything, it's increased opportunities across all organisations.
And if I may, and that's been my finding, having spoken to a number of arts organisations, particularly regional amenities, is that moving to an annual festival has forced collaboration in a lot of circumstances.
Councillor Philippine.
Kia ora, Chair. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Look, people have asked around the audiences, but my question is around companies, Māori Pacific, other ethnic groups performing within the Arts Festival. So is there a breakdown with that? I mean...
Your question relates to the artists, the percentage of artists
within
from...
the organisations that you end up
Yeah.
performing in the Arts Festival, breakdown and the area around other ethnic groups performing as part of the festival.
Yeah. I guess as an observer at the last couple of festivals, I mean, I would say that I think that the artists who are on stage are quite diverse because the festival takes place in a lot of different places around Auckland. But what we don't, I don't think we have statistics on that, though, that I can give you. But that's my impression of it. Perhaps I'll just give you an insight into my thinking about how we're planning the festival going forward, is that I've had a lot of conversation with various community groups, and one of the things that's very clear to me is that for the festival to have a greater penetration into Auckland, it needs to be relevant for people. And so the festival has several strands to it. One is where we're curating something and putting it in front of the audience and saying, here we've chosen something, we endorse this, you come and see it. But the other strand has to be back the other way, where there's a conversation rather than us saying, here's what you have to see. It's what does the festival need to do for it to be relevant for you and for your community? Because as you get further and further away from the middle of the city, not everyone is interested in seeing the ballet or the symphony orchestra. And so those performances are not relevant for all of Auckland. So that's why those conversations happen, and we have projects like Whānui, which we're going to expand, which is community-led. So we're inverting the power structure where we provide the resource and the communities provide the voice and make the decisions about what the projects are.
Cool, thanks.
Very good. Mayor Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jonathan, for that explanation. I think that's really good. It does need to be a two-way process, and you've probably got the sense around the table about it, and I think you're making really good progress towards that, and I think the annual festival and collaborating with the other groups is terrific. A city of our size needs an annual festival. My question is really on why our private sponsorship dropped by about 140,000 last year. Given that the festival's getting bigger, it seems to be succeeding in so many other ways. Why has there been a drop-off in private sector sponsorship, apart from, obviously it's always a competitive field, but are people who have sponsored it in the past giving you an explanation as to why they're not willing to continue to sponsor it? Do you get any feedback on that, David? I don't know whether that comes in your area.
We in fact got a new sponsor last year, Auckland University, so sponsors do rotate.
Yep.
And I think just moving from annual, some of the investments were still seen as a 2-year investment. We're working to get those back to an annual investment now. There's no question that had a slight dip, although in our individual giving it actually grew. So, and not all our sponsorship shows the sponsorship. There's a number of trusts that would show under our individual giving and under our patron schemes, like Sir James Wallace, for example. But yes, it is a challenge to get that cash back up. We've taken a new strategy this year. We've got 3 people working with us in targeted communities to try and get business communities to try and build that back up again. We've had some success already.
Yep. That's
but
good.
as I said earlier, the contra is actually crucial because in our books, it's what we would have to buy. We don't put contra in the book, that is an add-on. It's core business for us, the contra income.
Great. Thank you.
I think there's little doubt that there's less appetite from major corporates to sponsor anything, frankly, than there was a few years ago. A few years ago, we could collect large sums of money from major corporates, but that doesn't seem to be available anymore.
It's kind of counterintuitive though, isn't it? Because a few years ago, we were in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. People say they're doing reasonably well at the moment. You'd think that the wallets might be a little more open than they were in the past.
Would that they were.
Yeah, I mean, I think that given the growth of the economy in Auckland in absolute terms and also the growth in income because commodities, etc., are doing quite well, you would have expected people to have a little more flexibility in being able to sponsor. So, you know, if we're not doing well on sponsorship in the good times, what happens when the economic cycle turns? That would be my worry.
Councillor Fletcher.
Mine is to speak to the matter rather than a question.
I'm blending it, yep.
Well, I'm pleased to follow the Mayor on that issue, and I think what I'd like to do is take you back in history 20 years to what was intended with the Auckland Festival. The Auckland Festival was something that had been talked about for a long time. There was a very energetic supporter in a woman by the name of Christine Wethy, who really wanted to get a festival off the ground. And along with the Top Twins, they coerced me to actually make a formal commitment to, as Mayor, as part of a mayoral campaign, to commit to the Auckland Festival. And that was back in 1998. And it tells me just how long it takes, and it was always intended to be an annual festival. And it's quite nice to see David Rankin here today as the poor officer who was charged with sort of doing the numbers to get it off the ground. In fact, when we sort of launched the fact that we were going to have the festival, we built a lake over the car park in our Tia Centre here, and I rather suspect it might be part of the reason that we have had a few leaky problems there now. But with that aside, I'd just like to highlight the fact that it was inextricably linked to the establishment of Q Theatre, and it was prior to the establishment of the regional, the Auckland, what am I trying to say? The Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Act. And in a way, I think, in answering the Mayor, that is actually part of the problem for getting that corporate sponsorship off the ground. And I genuinely believe that until we're willing to nail government, whatever colour it might be, down to repealing the amenities funding and actually looking again at what the needs are, that the Auckland Festival was going to be designed, it was launched very much alongside of Auckland First City of Tamaki Makaurau First City of the Pacific. It was meant to be a Pacific festival, it was meant to have that outreach, and I think we really owe a huge amount of debt to the people who held that vision. You know, I've acknowledged David Rankin. I'd like to acknowledge my former husband, Angus Fletcher, who went on the original trust board along with Victoria Carter, Lex Henry and others who have come along, and John Judge and those who are here today. I really want to thank them. But I think they've got their arm up their back to a degree in terms of the funding. We need to do our part in the advocacy of getting the regional amenities funding off the ground, because that is, I think, giving a false sense of comfort to potential commercial entities that will come along and say, well, look, they're getting that money automatically. I think that it was intended that organisations like the Auckland Philharmonia, who were really struggling for funding at the time, it would all be linked into Auckland's festival. So congratulations to you. You've carried the mantle extremely proudly. It's something that all Aucklanders look forward to with eager anticipation. The weather is always going to be a factor, and I understand the plea that we're hearing from Member Paki here and from Councillor Casey that it must have a regional outreach, but it was always intended, and I suppose to a degree, there will always be a sense of civic to the event because it was built in and around, the initial concept was built in and around the Auckland's art quarter of that time, which was, you know, the Aotea precinct. And I think that that is the shop front for the Auckland Festival. Yes, we must have that outreach. Yes, it must continue to have that Pacific flavour, you know, that passionate Pacific point of difference that we have. But I believe that it must continue annually, and if we can do our part as a council to persuade government to come to the party in terms of understanding that the way that we have a selected group of organisations that have guaranteed funding, it's just unacceptable. This is going to be the opportunity for the festival to shine, to find the funding and to play a much more responsible role in the leadership and vision for arts in Tamaki Makaurau. So I would just like to thank everyone, and particularly those who have served in a governance sense on the board and those who work with Q Theatre, without which I don't think the two projects would have ever got off the ground without each other. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope that all members can support the recommendations today, and I'm happy to move them, or they're moved.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm more than happy to support this recommendation. I think the figures show that it's been an outstanding success. They speak for themselves. So if we look at the attendance figures, more than 196,000 attended. That's up more than 30,000 from just 2016. Large percentage of those, a third, are new audiences, so we're reaching out to new people all the time. People have talked about the geographical spread across Auckland. That's important, and it's good to see that there's a real focus getting put on that. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, but I find particularly pleasing, is the engagement with our school communities. So I see that over 6,000 students attended the festival at a heavily subsidised rate, and a large percentage of those were from decile 1 and 2 schools. So, you know, I really applaud this effort to get out and to engage with the young, and that's actually reflected furthermore in overall analysis of the number of people under the age of 40 that are going, which is nearly 50%. So I think this annualisation has been a huge success, and it can only get better. I'm sure the board are more than aware of the need to come up with you know, sponsorship and alternative sources of funding, and indeed there seems to be a bit of a reset there where that's on the upward trajectory in some parts. So I see Auckland becoming quite the centre of arts. Perhaps we can maybe rival Edinburgh at some point, but there's a potential to do what they've done in Scotland, where things just gets bigger and bigger, and there's a huge benefit, you know, not just to Auckland but to the country as a whole. So I think that this is really a success story, and I think you have a lot of people in Auckland now say roll on March when the Auckland Arts Festival is coming. So congratulations.
Councillor Hills.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for coming here and presenting to us. I think the festival this year was fantastic. I definitely support. I'm not 100% clear. It says they'll decide the level of funding, but I hope it stays the same, not a decrease. I noticed that in 2003 the actual funding council gave us 4.4 million, so that was a long time ago, and we're giving a lot more funding. So for what you do and what you've done this year on that funding is pretty amazing. I went to a lot of the shows. I know that the whānui, I went to I Spy, and Councillor Holson and I were involved with the repertoire, those events, and they were, you know, largely Māori and Pacifica people, young people from our community involved in both of those outreach programs in the community. And that was largely funded by Creative New Zealand, not us, but that was fantastic, and I loved that was involving young people in the arts, but actually getting them to, you know, present a lot of the art as well. Also, I thought the shows were pretty diverse. I think one thing I went to, there was an opera that was sung in English, Cantonese and Māori in the same show, and there was the other shows in the Spiegel tent, I think Respect or something, that was all New Zealand, Māori and Pacifica singers. And yeah, I just think there was such a different number of events that I've ever seen before, you know, right across Auckland. So it was pretty amazing. I'm sure you can, you know, get more sponsorship. That would be great. But I know that we put a lot of funding into other things such as sports and, you know, infrastructure. But I think a lot of the time art doesn't get the level of excitement and funding that it should or that it deserves. And I think that if it wasn't raining, you would have knocked those figures out. I think every single weekend of the festival, it was storms, so all the outdoor events, and also I'm sure the events throughout the RTS Centre were affected by that rain, like the zoo figures have been as well. But yeah, I just want to congratulate you. I'm so glad that we are making this an annual festival, and as you know, our international city, we should be doing something like this annually, and I know it has a big economic boost to the city, but also you know, involves so many people from the artists, but also getting other people in to see international artists that they have never seen before. So thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm not going to go over the previous three speakers, but look, it would have been good under 12 at the first bullet point, even though it's central Auckland focus, that there was some comment made around the outreach that you have across Tamaki Makaurau. Because for me, seeing that was, here we go again, Auckland focus, Auckland City focus, but it's not. And that got borne out with the questions that were asked by Member Kake and also Councillor Casey. So, you know, just explaining that. Chair, a question around the actual recommendations, and I know that Tania ended up mentioning in principle, do we need to put that in the recommendation, or is it okay with how we've got it now?
Well, it is strong enough, I think.
Okay, cool.
And we do notice that Arafa is the one that actually do
Understand
final
that, but it's just a
backwards,
comment.
so.
It was just a comment that was made when she first spoke, and hence the question. Thank you.
I mean, councillors, when it comes to the LTP, I mean, we're going to have a good hard look at the arts budgets, full stop, and Arafa's funding and all that, because a lot of the arts organisations are under pressure, and especially those that are more people reliant as compared to buildings or anything. We are sweating some assets out there, and they're not just buildings, we are sweating people in some organisations, and we need to be cognisant of that. So we have a mover and a seconder, and I think this probably will go through unanimously, so I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Great, thank you very much. Thank you, team. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.